Hi folks, this is Karim Raouf for IT Visualizer channel. We will continue our lab, the Matrix lab. This is the video number 52. I've been discussing in the previous video the following. I'm still working with Purple Knight Active Directory Security Assessment Tool. We have been working with the group of tests named Active Directory Delegation, and we have stopped the last time at the test called Privilege Objects with Unprivileged Owners. Basically, a privilege object here is referring to a group or a user. Okay, the owner of this group or the owner of this user, which is a privilege user or a privilege group, should be a privilege owner. So, for example, the group of the domain admins in the Active Directory, the owner of this group is the domain admins. Okay, if this is different, for example, if the domain admins ownership is transferred from the domain admins to any other group, then we are in a problem. Okay, then he can play with uh, this group and do a lot of damage. So here is saying, or let's see the description here, saying the privilege object determined by the admin count. We have discussed what is the admin count. It's like a flag that will or a tag that will be on any object, a user or a group that has privileges, is owned by an account that is unprivileged, then any compromise of that unprivileged account could result in those privileged objects delegation being modified, since owners can override any delegation on an object if only temporary. Okay, and let's see also here the likelihood of compromise. Most privileged objects are owned by privileged groups or users. We have seen this, or I have discussed this. But if a privileged object were to be owned by an unprivileged account, for example, the domain admins group is owned by another group, not the domain admins themselves. Okay, this will be a problem. I will discuss, or the AI tools will give us examples so we can clarify this concept more. Okay, and even though SDProp might correct any delegation done by any attacker who has compromised an owner, the attacker could have up to 1 hour to perform any changes on the privileged objects. Example, group membership changes or password changes before SDProp corrects it. So even if a privileged object is owned by an unprivileged owner, okay, the SDProp will correct this, but it will correct it, or it will do this every 60 minutes, so the attacker can use this time to compromise the privileged objects. Okay, so he can do that. So let's see, for example, how Perplexity has explained this. So if we go there, here I'm telling him, can you explain this content? I have got the description and the likelihood of compromisation. I have took these two and asked it Perplexity to explain it. Okay, and using a real world example. So I have a domain called matrix.internal. Explain these concepts or explain these two description or this content using a real world example, for example, matrix.internal. Let's see what will be the answer. First of all, before doing this, who is an owner or who is considered to be an owner? What is the owner? So here one question or one something arises. Who is considered the owner of an object in Windows operating system or Active Directory? Okay, this is the basic answer. And the owner, or he's saying, or let's say, who is the owner or who is considered to be the owner of an object? Okay, so let's see this one, or let's read it loudly before going and explaining the test itself.
In the Windows operating system, the owner of an object is typically defined as the ownership details. In the Windows operating system, the owner of an object is typically defined as the user or process that created that object. This ownership grants the owner specific rights, including the ability to set permissions for that object and manage access controls. Ownership details. Default owner. By default, the owner of an object, which can include files, folders, registry keys, etc., is the user or process that creates it. This includes system files and folders, which are often owned by the Trusted Installer Group, a built-in account that manages system files in Windows. Control over permissions. The owner has the authority to change permissions associated with the object, allowing them to specify which users or groups can access or modify the object. This capability is crucial for maintaining security and managing access to sensitive data. Taking ownership. If a user needs to take ownership of an object, they must have the appropriate permissions, such as the Take Ownership user right. Administrators can also take ownership of any object, even if they do not have explicit permissions set on that object. This is essential for scenarios where access is denied due to restrictive permissions. Security implications. Ownership is a significant aspect of Windows security. Only trusted users should be granted the ability to take ownership of objects, as this can lead to potential security risks if mismanaged. The ability to change ownership and permissions should be carefully controlled within an organization. Summary. In summary, the owner of an object in the Windows operating system is the individual or process that created it, and this ownership confers significant control over how that object is accessed and managed. Owners can modify permissions, grant access to other users, and ensure that the object is protected according to their needs.
So this is the concept of ownership. Who is the owner of an object? The creator of the object is the owner of the object. So this is the explanation of Perplexity, and then we can go and ask Claude another question. Who is the owner of the object? Okay, in the operating system, the same. So if we know the owner concept, then we can discuss the test, which is focusing on privileged objects are owned by unprivileged owners. So let's see also what is the concept of ownership in the Windows operating system. Let's go and see here also the explanation of Claude 3.5.
Would you like me to elaborate on any specific? In the Windows operating system, object ownership is an important concept related to security and access control. The owner of an object, such as a file, folder, or registry key, is typically the user who created the object. By default, when a user creates a file or folder, they become the owner. An administrator. Administrators have the ability to take ownership of objects created by other users. The system account. Some system-created objects are owned by the system account, which represents the operating system itself. A security principal. This could be a user account, a group, or a service account that has been granted ownership rights. The owner of an object has special privileges, including the ability to change permissions on the object, the right to access the object, even if other permissions would deny access, the power to transfer ownership to another user or group. It's worth noting that ownership is distinct from having full control permissions. An object's owner always has the right to change permissions, even if they don't have full control of the object. Administrators can view and change object ownership using tools like File Explorer for files and folders, or the Registry Editor for registry keys. They can also use command line tools like icicles or PowerShell cmdlets to manage ownership. Would you like me to elaborate on any specific aspect of object ownership in Windows?
So this is the explanation of the ownership concept. Now let's go to the test. Here I'm asking you to explain the test. What does it do exactly? So let's see here what will Perplexity will say, and then we will ask Claude the same question. So here we will get a real world example to explain the test we are currently explaining. Just a moment.
Real world example: privileged accounts and the admin SD holder in Active Directory. Imagine a company called Matrix Internal that has an Active Directory AD environment. Matrix Internal has several privileged groups and accounts that are critical to managing their AD infrastructure. Domain admins. This group has the highest level of privilege and can make changes to almost any object in AD. Enterprise admins. This group has similar privileges to domain admins, but across multiple domains. Schema admins. This group controls the AD schema, which defines the types of objects that can be stored in AD. Administrators. This built-in group has administrative access to the local machine. These privileged groups and accounts are considered protected in AD. They have special security settings that are automatically applied and reset every hour by the SD-prop process. The admin SD holder object. The admin SD holder object in AD holds the security descriptor, SD, that defines the permissions for protected groups and accounts. This SD is automatically applied to any object where the admin count attribute is set to 1. The admin count attribute. The admin count attribute is set to 1 for any user account that is a direct or indirect member of a protected group. This flag indicates that the account has elevated privileges and its security settings should be managed by the admin SD holder. Potential security risk. Let's say an unprivileged user account like John Doe is somehow granted ownership of a privileged object like the domain admins group. This could happen if a privileged user accidentally or maliciously modifies the object's owner. Since John Doe is unprivileged, an attacker who compromises that account could take control of the domain admins group. They could add themselves or other accounts to the group, giving them the ability to make any changes they want in AD. The SD-prop process would eventually reset the domain admins group's permissions back to the admin SD holder settings. However, the attacker would have up to an hour to make malicious changes before that happened. Mitigating the risk. To mitigate this risk, Matrix Internal should follow these best practices. Regularly monitor the admin count attribute to identify any unprivileged accounts that have been added to protected groups. Ensure that all protected groups and accounts are owned by privileged accounts or the system account. Implement strong access controls and monitoring on the admin SD holder object to prevent unauthorized modifications. Educate privileged users on the risks of modifying the owner of protected objects. By understanding how the admin SD holder and SD-prop processes work and proactively managing privileged accounts, Matrix Internal can reduce the risk of a security breach in their Active Directory environment.
So this is how if a privileged object is owned by an unprivileged owner. Okay, so these are the risks an attacker can take control of a group like the domain admins and add themselves to the group or do a lot of damage. So this is the explanation of Perplexity. If we go to Claude and ask it the same question to explain this test, let's see here the explanation of Claude 3.5 Sonnet.
Security breaches if exploited. Copy. Certainly, I'd be happy to explain this concept using a real-world example in the context of Active Directory for the domain matrix.internal. Let's imagine Matrix Corporation has an Active Directory setup for their domain matrix.internal. In this scenario, we'll focus on a critical group called database admins that has high-level privileges in the organization. Real-world example. The database admins group in matrix.internal is a privileged object. Admin count equals 1, meaning it has special protections and elevated access rights. Normally, this group would be owned by a privileged account like domain admins or a dedicated privileged service account. However, due to a misconfiguration or an error, the ownership of the database admins group is accidentally assigned to a regular user account. Let's say John.Doe at matrix.internal. John Doe is a regular employee with no special privileges. He's unaware that he now owns this critical group. An attacker manages to compromise John's account through a phishing attack or by guessing his weak password. The attacker, now having control of John's account, realizes they own the database admins group. This is where the risk comes in. The attacker can modify the group's membership, adding their own malicious accounts or removing legitimate admins. B. They could change the password requirements for the group, making it easier to crack passwords of group members. C. They might alter permissions, granting themselves or other compromised accounts additional rights. The attacker has a window of opportunity, up to 1 hour, before the SD-Prop, Security Descriptor Propagator, process runs. SD-Prop is a protection mechanism that periodically checks and resets permissions on privileged objects. During this hour, the attacker could make significant changes that could severely compromise Matrix Corporation security, such as adding themselves to the database admin's group or changing critical database passwords. Even after SD-Prop runs and corrects the permissions, the damage might already be done. The attacker could have established other backdoors or elevated privileges that persist. This scenario illustrates why it's crucial to ensure that privileged objects in Active Directory are always owned by appropriate privileged accounts. Regular security audits should be performed to check for such misconfigurations, as they can lead to significant security breaches if exploited.
Very, very good example and explanation for the test, okay, which is again focusing on privileged objects with unprivileged owners. We have seen the risks of having some objects or some privileged objects owned by unprivileged owners. Very, very good explanation. Now we can go to the next test, which is unprivileged users can add computer accounts to the domain. So this is just a moment, guys. So let's continue, guys. This test is focusing on a very, very important point. Any user or any authenticated user in the domain can join any computer to the domain. So for example, if I have a user named Karim, I can join any computer to the domain. So I can go put my credentials and then join any computer. So this is a very, very dangerous point. So this gives the ability for any user to join any foreign computer or malicious computer to the domain, even though he is not aware of that. Or a hacker can hack any normal account or any limited account, but through this account he can join his computer to the domain, and then he can access to the resources of the domain. So this is very, very important tests, and this test I have discussed this test and how to fix this issue specifically when I was talking about the Testumo report. So in the Testumo report, there is a script or there is a PowerShell command. You can close this point or this security point immediately. You can modify something called MSDS machine account quota. This is reset, or its value should be 0. By doing this, you are closing or you are disabling any authenticated user in the domain to join any computer to the domain. Okay, so this is what this test is talking about. So let's see here the description. He's saying that it checks for any configuration that allows unprivileged domain members to add computer accounts to the domain. This is what I'm talking about. By default, member of the authenticated users group can add up to 10 machine accounts to a domain. So this is what I'm talking about. So this value, MSDS machine account quota attribute on the domain naming context head is not set to 0. So this is an attribute that is on the domain naming partition of the Active Directory database. You need to change this attribute on the Active Directory domain partition, okay, and set it to 0. Regular users have this ability. The ability to do this confers certain rights on those created machine accounts that can be abused by a variety of purpose-based attacks. Note, this configuration may be enabled but be already meditated by a GPO. So you can do this by a GPO or creating a GPO. User rights, add workstations to domain configured with only high privilege accounts linked to the domain controllers or you that are not checked by this indicator. Anyway, so if you see my Testumo report video, this is fixed by a PowerShell script. You can run it on the domain controller and it will add or it will modify this attribute and make it 0. It was before that it is 10. So if you reset it to 0, then any normal user or regular user will not be able to join any machine to the domain. This will only be done by the domain admins, okay, or the enterprise admins. So this is a very, very straightforward test. If we go to the next, so we have now finished all of the AD delegation tests. Now we are going further, or we are discussing the account security. Some tests related to the account security. I think here is related to account here, user account or a computer account. Account security indicators pertain to security weakness on individual accounts, built-in or otherwise. So he's focusing about individual accounts or built-in accounts, or I think maybe computer accounts. Now we can go further and see the next the first one of these tests is abnormal password refresh. This indicator looks for a user account with recent PW last set change without a corresponding password replication. Okay, so this test is a little bit not easy to understand. So for example, let me explain it, and here is explaining it with an example, but the AI tools will also clarify this concept. For example, if an administrator marks the option user must change password at next login, this is very, very famous thing to do. If you are creating a user for the first time, you will put a temporary password and check this option, user must change password at next login, and then the user, when he log in, he need to put a new password that he knows. Okay, so the administrator give him a temporary password, then check this option on his account. When he log in for the first time, he will be asked to change his password with the one that he knows. Okay, so for example, if an administrator do this and then clears this option later, what will happen? The password last set is updated without the password actually being changed. So this is an attribute called PW last set, or the last password set. If the administrator do that, the password last set is changed, which means that the password is already changed. Okay, so here, which is not correct, he has only unchecked the option, but the password last set attribute is changed and updated, and it indicates that there is a password change, which is what not happened. Okay, he has just only uncheck the option and check it again, or check the option and check it again. But here, this is considered a password change. Okay, even though in real or practical situation it wasn't changed. Okay, so this could be an administrative error, an attempt to bypass the organization password policy. So an attacker can use something like this to do a very, very, very critical, or can he hack an account by using this method. We will see how this is done, or I will show you how the AI tools will explain this concept, okay, or explain this test in detail. So let's see if we go there and ask Perplexity to explain the same, or ask to explain this test with a real world example. Let's see how he will explain it.
Real-world example. Password management in Active Directory at Matrix. Internal. In the context of an organization like Matrix, internal, managing user accounts and their passwords is critical for maintaining security. Active Directory, AD, provides mechanisms to enforce password policies, including requiring users to change their passwords at the next logon. However, certain actions can lead to potential security risks, particularly when password attributes are manipulated. The scenario. Imagine a situation at Matrix. Internal, where an administrator is managing user accounts. One of the accounts, Jane Doe, is a member of the finance team and has access to sensitive financial data. The administrator decides that Jane Doe should change her password for security reasons. The administrator marks the user must change password at next logon option in AD. This action updates the PW_last_set attribute to the current date and time, indicating that Jane Doe needs to change her password upon her next login. However, after some time, the administrator realizes that Jane Doe is currently on vacation and will not be able to log in. To avoid any inconvenience, the administrator unchecks the user must change password at next logon option. The implications. When the administrator unchecks this option, the PWDLASSET attribute is updated again to reflect the most recent change, even though Jane Doe's password has not actually been changed. This situation raises a couple of security concerns. Administrative error. The administrator may have inadvertently bypassed the organization's password policy, which could lead to security vulnerabilities if Jane Doe's account is compromised. Likelihood of compromise. If an attacker gains access to Jane Doe's account, through phishing, for example, and sees that the PWDLASSET attribute has changed recently without a corresponding password change, they might exploit this situation. The attacker could potentially use this knowledge to maintain access to the account, knowing that the password policy was not enforced correctly. Mitigating the risk. To address these risks, Matrix Internal should implement the following best practices. Audit and monitor changes. Regularly audit the PWDLASSET attribute for user accounts, especially those marked for password changes. Monitoring for recent changes without corresponding password updates can help identify potential administrative errors or malicious activities. Enforce password policies. Ensure that password policies are strictly enforced and that any changes to user account settings are logged and reviewed by security personnel. Training for administrators. Provide training to administrators on the importance of adhering to password policies and the implications of bypassing these policies. Implement alerts. Set up alerts for any changes to the user must change password at next logon option, especially for accounts with elevated privileges or access to sensitive data. By understanding the implications of password management actions in Active Directory, Matrix Internal can enhance its security posture and reduce the likelihood of account compromises.
So very, very good example. Let's see Claude also explaining this point uh, and how something like that could be very, very dangerous. Let's see.
Start new chat. Certainly. Let's break this down using a real-world example in the context of Active Directory for the domain matrix.internal. Real-world example. Imagine Matrix Corporation, a large tech company, uses Active Directory to manage its user accounts and network resources. The company has a strict password policy that requires employees to change their passwords every 90 days. Scenario. New employee onboarding. Alice Smith joins Matrix Corporation as a new software developer. The IT administrator, Bob, creates her account alice.smith at matrix.internal. Initial account setup. As per company policy, Bob sets Alice's account with the user must change password at next logon option checked. This is a common practice to ensure new users set their own passwords. The problem arises. Alice is working remotely and hasn't logged in yet. She calls the IT help desk saying she can't access her email because she hasn't set up her account yet, but she has an important deadline and needs immediate access. The shortcut. Bob, under pressure to solve the issue quickly, decides to uncheck the user must change password at next logon option without Alice actually changing her password. He then provides Alice with the initial password over the phone. The system's reaction. When Bob unchecks this option, the Active Directory updates Alice's PWDLASSET attribute, making it appear as if Alice has recently changed her password. The discrepancy. However, there's no corresponding password replication event because Alice didn't actually change her password. The initial password set by Bob is still in use. The security implication. This action effectively bypasses the company's password policy. Alice is now using a password she didn't set herself, which may not meet the company's complexity requirements. Moreover, this password might be known to Bob or recorded in a ticket system, compromising security. The detection. A security audit tool scanning the matrix.internal domain flags Alice's account because it detects a recent PWDLASSET change without a corresponding password change event. Potential risks. Alice might continue using the initial weak password indefinitely. The password known to the IT staff could be misused. This practice, if repeated, could become a pattern that weakens the overall security posture of Matrix.internal. Possible legitimate reasons. In some cases, this could be a legitimate administrative action. For example, if there was a bulk password reset due to a security incident, administrators might need to clear the must-change flag for multiple accounts. This scenario demonstrates why monitoring PW set changes without corresponding password changes is important. It could indicate either administrative errors or intentional bypassing of security policies in the Matrix.internal domain. Regular audits and automated monitoring can help detect such discrepancies and ensure adherence to password policies.
Very, very good answer. As we have seen here, this is why a test like that should be, or we need to focus on a test like that, abnormal password refresh. So this is a very, very important test to focus on. Let's go to the next test, which is built-in domain administrator account with old password. Okay, so here is talking about the local administrator account on the domain controller. You should make sure that this account password was changed within the last 180 days. He said the password for the built-in domain administrator account. I don't think there is something called domain administrator account. I think this is the local administrator account, I think. Anyway, if there is a built-in domain administrator account or the local administrator account on domain controller, both should have the password changed within 180 days. But this is normal thing. If you have a password policy, in effect, you should be notified after maybe 90 days or 60 days that your password should be changed. Anyway, this will not apply to the local, or the password policy will not be applied to the local administrator account. We need, I think, no, it will be applied to the local administrator account as well. So this will be applied to the local administrator account and the Active Directory accounts. Anyway, maybe the local administrator account on the domain controller, you don't use it more frequently. So you should focus on changing this password regularly, because most of us disable this account and don't use it frequently. You can automate the process of the local administrator password changing by using Microsoft Local Administrator Password Solution, which is already integrated within the Active Directory. So anyway, this is a normal test. We can see this is a very, very simple test to explain. Then built-in administrator account used within the last 2 weeks. So he is focusing on the regular using of the domain administrator account. He's still insisting, I think, there is a domain administrator account built in. I didn't see this account before. Maybe he's talking about the local administrator account. Anyway, if it's talking about the local administrator account, it is already disabled by default, or not by default. We need to disable it after promoting the server to be a domain controller and having a domain admin account. Then you should disable the local administrator account. Anyway, if there is such an account, I don't think I used it before, but anyway, the domain administrator account should be used because you are using it for normal operations, changing the Active Directory, creating users and groups. Anyway, if this account is not used for the last 2 weeks, then there is a problem. But maybe the domain admin is taking a vacation. So this is also maybe not an accurate test. Let's see here the description. Domain administrator account should be used for initial build activities and when necessary, disaster recovery. The indicator checks to see if the last login time for the built-in domain administrator account has been updated within the last 2 weeks. If so, it could indicate that the user has been compromised. I think here he's talking about the local administrator account, not the domain admin. Okay, I think he said domain administrator, okay, not domain admin. I think he's talking about the local administrator accounts. There is no, as far as I know, there is no something called domain admin account. Okay, this is the local administrator account. So if we can summarize this, the local administrator account of the domain controller should be disabled. The password of this account should be changed regularly. You should not use it for logging in on the domain controller. Okay, this was used initially when you are promoting the server to be a primary domain controller, using or doing some initial configuration, and then it should be disabled and renamed. So this is one of the good things concerning or the best practices. Again, he's saying if best practices are followed and the domain admin is not used, he's focusing upon domain admin. I don't think there is a domain admin or built-in domain admin account. Let's ask Perplexity, because here I am a little bit confused. Is there built-in domain admin account in Active Directory? Let's see the answer. So let's see here what will be the answer. Indeed, have built in one of these is the domain administrator account. Built-in domain administrator. The built-in administrator account is created automatically when the Active Directory domain is established. It is located under users containers and has the following key. So he's talking about the administrator, which is the local one. He's talking about the local administrator account. Okay, here he is referring to it as domain administrator account. This is as far as I know, it is the local administrator account on the domain controller, built-in administrator account. This is the administrator account in the Active Directory, which is the local administrator account on the domain controller. Okay, default membership, it is the administrators, domain admins, enterprise admins. So this is the local administrator account. Okay, this is the local administrator account. Okay, so again, if we go there to the Purple Knight, this account should not be used for logging in on the domain controller. Okay, you can create an account and put it as a member of the domain admins and enterprise admins, and can log into the domain controller by this account. Do not use the local administrator account on the domain controller to manage and configure your domain. Okay, it should be used initially or during the promoting of the server to be a primary domain controller. Then it should be disabled and renamed. So this is one thing to talk about. If we go there and go to the next test, which is computer accounts in privilege groups, this is a very weird test, because actually I didn't find, or I didn't encounter something like that in my practical experience or in my practical life. Okay, working as an administrator, I didn't found for example, a computer is added to the domain admins group, for example. So this is not, I didn't encounter something like this. But here is checking if there is any computer account is added to a privilege group. Basically, we are talking about a user added to a privilege group, but not a computer account added to a privilege group. So this is one of the things here is saying, for example, if you added a workstation to be a member of the domain admins group, then this computer, or if someone hack this computer, he can have the rights of the domain admin. Okay, so for example, he's saying here, if a computer account is a member of the domain privilege group, then anyone that compromises that computer account becomes administrator, can act as the member of that group. Generally speaking, there is a little reason for normal computer accounts to be a part of privileged groups. So this is not a normal process. You will not find a computer account in a privileged group. Mostly we have in privileged groups users or user accounts to be member of a privileged group. Okay, not the opposite, or not a computer account. So let's see also here Perplexity explaining this this test, okay, by an example. Let's see the example here. Just wait for a moment. Let's see, here is the answer, and then let's read it loudly.
Real-world example. Computer accounts and privileged groups at Matrix. Internal. In the Active Directory environment of Matrix, internal, managing computer accounts and their memberships in privileged groups is crucial for maintaining security. Privileged groups, such as domain admins, enterprise admins, and administrators, have elevated permissions that can significantly impact the organization's security posture. The scenario. Consider a scenario where Matrix Internal has a computer account named FinancePC01. This computer is used by the finance department to access sensitive financial applications and data. However, due to an administrative oversight, FinancePC01 is mistakenly added to the domain admins group. Implications of membership. Elevated privileges. By being a member of the domain admins group, FinancePC01 now has the same privileges as any user in that group. This includes the ability to create, modify, or delete any object in Active Directory, access all domain resources, and make significant changes to the domain environment. Risk of compromise. If an attacker gains access to FinancePC01, for example, through malware, phishing, or exploiting a vulnerability, they effectively become a domain admin. This means they can execute commands and make changes across the entire domain without raising immediate suspicion. Normal operations versus privileged access. Typically, computer accounts should not be part of privileged groups. They are meant to represent machines rather than users, and their access should be limited to what is necessary for their function. In this case, FinancePC01 does not need domain admin privileges to perform its role, making its membership in this group unnecessary and dangerous. Likelihood of compromise. The likelihood of compromise increases significantly when a computer account is part of a privileged group. Attackers often target lower-level accounts or machines to gain a foothold in a network. Once they compromise a machine like FinancePC01, they can exploit its elevated privileges to move laterally across the network, access sensitive data, or disrupt operations. Mitigating the risk. To prevent such scenarios at Matrix Internal, the organization should implement the following best practices. Regular audits. Conduct regular audits of group memberships to ensure that only appropriate accounts are members of privileged groups. This includes checking for computer accounts that should not have elevated privileges. Least privilege principle. Apply the principle of least privilege by ensuring that accounts, both user and computer, have only the permissions necessary to perform their functions. Computer accounts should not be members of privileged groups unless absolutely necessary. Monitoring and alerts. Set up monitoring and alerting mechanisms to detect any changes to group memberships, especially for privileged groups. This helps identify unauthorized changes quickly. Training and awareness. Educate administrators about the risks associated with improperly assigning privileges and the importance of adhering to security policies. By understanding the implications of computer accounts being members of privileged groups, Matrix Internal can better protect its Active Directory environment from potential security breaches.
So very good explanation what the importance or the dangerous or why it is dangerous to put a computer account in a privileged group. Let's go to Claude and see its answer concerning or explaining this topic or this test.
Start new chat. Start. Certainly. Let's explore this concept using a real-world example in the context of Active Directory for the domain Matrix.internal. Real-world example. Imagine Matrix Corporation, a large technology company, uses Active Directory to manage its network resources and user accounts. The company has various departments and a complex IT infrastructure. Scenario. Network setup. Matrix Corporation has a domain called Matrix.internal. Within this domain, there are several built-in privilege groups such as domain admins, enterprise admins, and backup operators. The problematic configuration. An IT administrator, let's call him Dave, is setting up a new server for the finance department. This server's computer account in Active Directory is named FIN Server 01. The mistake. Dave, in an attempt to grant the server some additional permissions, mistakenly adds the FIN Server 01 computer account to the domain admins group. The security implication. This configuration means that anyone who gains administrative access to the FIN Server 01 machine effectively becomes a domain admin in the matrix.internal domain. The potential attack scenario. A malicious actor, Eve, manages to exploit a vulnerability in a web application running on FIN Server 01. Eve escalates her privileges and becomes a local administrator on FIN Server 01. Because FIN Server 01 is a member of the domain admins group, Eve can now use this computer account to perform domain-wide administrative actions. The extent of the compromise. With domain admin privileges, Eve could create, modify, or delete any user account in the matrix.internal domain. Access any resource in the domain. Modify group policies affecting all computers and users. Potentially compromise the entire Active Directory infrastructure. Detection. A security audit tool scanning the matrix.internal domain flags the FIN Server 01 account because it detects a computer account as a member of the domain admins group. Why it's unusual. Computer accounts typically don't need to be members of privileged groups. Their permissions are usually managed through other means, such as specific service accounts or targeted group policies. Legitimate use cases, rare while generally discouraged, there might be very specific and rare scenarios where a computer account needs elevated privileges. For example, a dedicated administrative workstation used for domain management might justify such a configuration, but this would be an exception rather than the rule. Remediation. Upon discovering this issue, the IT security team at Matrix Corporation should immediately remove the FIN Server 01 account from the domain admins group. Investigate how and why this configuration was set. Check for any suspicious activities that might have occurred. Review and adjust their change management and access control processes. This scenario demonstrates why it's crucial to monitor membership in privileged groups, especially for computer accounts. In the matrix.internal domain, regular audits and automated monitoring can help detect such misconfigurations quickly, preventing potential wide-scale compromises of the Active Directory environment.
Very, very good answer. So we can see the Purple Knight tool is focusing on privileged groups and privileged users, okay, and privileged owners. So we can see focusing on privileged groups and users and owners is very, very critical because they have a lot of power in the domain. Okay, so let's go and see the next test, which is privileged users that are disabled. Okay, saying that if there is a privileged user that is disabled, so why you should disable a privileged user? Maybe you are preparing it to be deleted, but this should be for a very, very short time. You should disable an account for a small period of time and then delete it immediately if there is no need for it. For example, here the indicator looks for privileged user accounts as indicated with their admin count attribute set to 1 that are disabled. If the privilege account is disabled, it should be removed from its privileged groups to prevent inherent misuse. So for example, if you created a domain or created a user and put it in the domain admin group, okay, and then you for some reason disable this account, you should remove it from the domain admins group. Okay, so this is one thing. If you are doing this, when a user is disabled, it tends to be monitored as closely as active accounts. If this user is also a privileged user, then it becomes a target for takeover if an attacker can enable the account. Anyway, what we have discovered that I have my local administrator account disabled. I have done this already, because a best practice is to disable the local administrator account on all of your domain controllers. This is disabled. I should disable it, and this is the best practice for doing that. So this is a normal process, and it is listed in all of the famous security recommendations to disable the local administrator account. So here I think the test is not correct. Okay, you should disable the local administrator account and rename it, and do not use it under any circumstances unless it is a disaster recovery or something like this. Okay, so this is the local administrator account. It is disabled and it should be renamed. We can see here it was named administrator, but I've changed it to K Raouf, and you should regularly change the password of this account. So we can go further with the test and see the next one: enable admin accounts that are inactive. So here he's talking about the local administrator account. It is disabled, so he's saying, or he's searching or scanning if there is an admin account that is enabled after an inactivity or in a period of inactivity. The indicator logs for admin accounts that are enabled but have not logged in for the past 90 days. Attacker can compromise these accounts, may be able to operate unnoticed. Okay, so he's saying here, no, I think this is a different thing. He's saying that if there is an admin account that has not logged in for 90 days, so this is an indicator maybe that the owner of the account is on a vacation. But if you will be on a vacation for a long time, then you should disable the account. Okay, you should not leave it like that. So anyway, he is searching for admin accounts that are enabled and not logged in for 90 days. So this will be an interest point for an attacker to use it, okay, because the owner of the account is not in place, so he can use his account. Okay, so anyway, you should disable accounts that are not used for a long time. Okay, so or do not use or do not take a long vacation. Okay, so this is a very, very important point. You should not leave a high privilege account to be enabled and not used for a long time. Okay, so this is also one thing to note. Okay, removing these accounts, I think we should not remove the account, but it can be disabled for a certain amount of time. Okay, and then we can go to the next step, which is infernal admins. Here is saying that this test is looking for users which were added and removed from admin group within a 48-hour span. So he's focusing upon creating an admin account and deleting it after 48 hours. So this is typically an attacker style, okay, to create an account and then use it and then delete it. But maybe you as a domain admin has created a user for one of your IT, and then maybe you have changed your mind and you need to disable it or delete it. So this can be both ways, a suspicious style or a legitimate style or a legitimate process. So you need to but I think 90% this can be defined as a suspicious style. Okay, no one will create an account, especially a privileged account, and then delete it after 48 hours. So this is also one of the very, very important tests to focus on and see it. This is a very, very critical one. Okay, so I think maybe also I think Perplexity we have already also explained this this thing. Let's go further, I think, and see. Okay, I think this is okay. I think here it is. This is the explanation of this test. What it is here, it's possible to remove a user where is the indicated by admin account that are privileged. Okay, I think we can stop at this point, okay, which is fine-grained group policy not applied to a group. I will stop at this point, okay, and we will continue discussing it in the upcoming video. Hope this video is informative for you all, and thank you all for viewing. Thank you so much.